I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. I believe the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the one right that's listed in the Constitution that uses that very specific affirmative language, shall not be infringed.
It's also the one right that uses the phrase well-regulated.
Correct, when it's talking about the militia and the state.
By the way, just for clarity's sake,
yeah.
I'm not against the Second Amendment.
Well, wait a minute there, John Stewart. How much do you support the Second Amendment? What level of infringement do you want? How do you want to control guns in this country?
If we had gun registration, if we were able to track purchases, if they have a technology that every bullet would be stamped with an individual like a fingerprint, if we had an ATF that wasn't defunded, we would be able to enforce gun laws more effectively, and we would be able to solve gun crimes more effectively.
We'll talk about that in just a minute, but we have a giveaway going on, and it ends really soon. It's absolutely free. So all you got to do is click the link in the description to find out what you can win. It's a super secret giveaway. I'll tell you this much, though, it does fit in a holster. So let's talk about this recent interview with John Stewart and the state senator, what's his name? Senator Nathan Dahm. John Stewart got hold of this Senator Dahm, and they started talking about all sorts of things, including the Second Amendment. Stewart is a man who has made his career being a bully, talking over people. Remember, John Stewart, it's his show. He gets to set the agenda. He's the star. He's going to make sure that he has the last word, and in fact, gets the only word when he's talking to people. So we need to take a few of these elements and pretend that John Stewart had given Senator Dahm a chance to respond, because what's happening throughout this interview is that John Stewart is putting words in the senator's mouth and making statements and not letting the senator respond. And that's typical of what happens when you want to control a conversation, especially when you're doing an interview like this. And remember, John Stewart, he's not a news person. He's a comedian. He's a satirist. He's trying to win this argument, not explore the idea around the Second Amendment. So, for instance, right after Dahm says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, John Stewart drops that little quip about the Second Amendment, also using the words well-regulated. He then moves on really quickly, and Dahm never gets the opportunity to speak out and point out that there are two halves of the Second Amendment, and they mean two different things. And the courts have clearly said that the right of the people to keep and bear arms is an individual right, and it is not connected to being part of or service in the militia. That's very, very clear. But Dahm never got the chance, or never took the chance, to make that statement. He didn't say, hang on, John, let me finish. And in a situation like this, you really got to fight back, because you know what? A guy like John Stewart and a lot of these other comedians who are sitting down to take a social stance, they're not letting their guests talk, and they're not letting people say what's really on their mind or make a clear and coherent statement at all.
So, you know what would help the problem that we're facing with firearms?
What?
The fatherlessness crisis that we have in America. If you look at the statistics.
Right. Yeah, they're dying from gun deaths.
80% of school shooters either came from a broken or fatherless home.
So you would say no guns for fatherless homes?
No, that's not what I would say. I would say
by talking over someone, by not giving them that opportunity, John Stewart makes people look unprepared and unintelligent. And he only gives the parts of the information that will support his point. For example, he talks about the increased number of guns and the increased number of deaths. He talks about 400 million guns and 50,000 deaths. And then he never mentions the increased number of people. He doesn't talk about the ever-growing population. And when we're talking about something like this, you need to understand that there's lots of different elements and variables when you're talking about statistics. And any statistician worth his salt will tell you that correlation is not causation. But John Stewart never lets that out. He never gives us that little tidbit. So maybe that the overall number of gun deaths goes up in accordance with the overall population. But how does that work per 100,000 or any other variable that you want to use to make the statistics work for you? And this is a case where Jon Stewart is taking those statistics, twisting them just a little bit, giving just enough so that he can make his point, but not allow anyone else to make their point. And again, just keeps cutting off his guest. One of the other things that you can see Stewart doing during this interview is he's continually putting words in Dom's mouth. And Dom never stops to say, wait a minute, your idea about, and we'll just use this example, registration is simply a precursor to gun confiscation. So Dom keeps saying that you want to have chaos and things of that nature. And the senator never stops him and never tries to take control of that conversation. And it's that kind of stuff that just allows people like Jon Stewart doing these interviews to phrase and frame the gun debate exactly how they want to, while not letting any of us on the pro-gun side make our case and our statement. So Stewart talks about background checks, and they don't work. They don't reduce crime. We know that. Registration doesn't work, doesn't reduce crime, and we already have permitting in lots of places. And criminals don't get firearms permits. We never get to talk about that. And why didn't Dom just stand up to Stewart and say, hey, John, it sounds to me like you just want to collect all the guns. How are we going to do that? Is that going to create a police state? Is that going to take over everything that we want to do? Stewart just keeps hammering on this point, on the point of 50,000 people are dead. And I don't know where he got that number, but Dom never gets to bring up other instances. More than 1 million people stop crimes every year using their firearms. And later on, Jon Stewart says he calls these references just anecdotes. Whenever we're talking about someone whose life is saved with a gun, that's just an anecdote. But when Jon Stewart is talking about someone who dies as a result of gun violence, that's a hard and fast fact. But someone who is saved is just an anecdote.
Are you familiar with the 39-year-old woman in New Jersey?
I'm familiar with a ton of anecdotes.
Yeah.
I'm asking you a simple question.
This is not an anecdote,
When
John.
the police
this actually happened.
go to a house.
She had a restraining order on her ex-boyfriend.
I
of
can
an
run
individual.
through
I know, we can both run
hundreds
through
and
that.
hundreds of examples.
Throughout this interview, Stewart continually says that Dom is against bringing order to the gun owners of this country. But by bringing order, Stewart seems to want to introduce a police state. We mentioned that word before. That's what gun confiscation will bring to the country. And why couldn't Dom have come back to him and said, wait a minute, Jon Stewart, looks like you only want the government to have guns, where only the police get to have guns. And you remember, Jon Stewart, how you called the police racist and violent and overly militarized? But maybe what Stewart means by bringing order to the people who own guns is that he only wants the government to have guns. He only wants the police to have guns. So Senator Dom needed to stand up, sit up, speak up, and say, wait a minute, Jon Stewart, it seems like you only want the police to have guns. You remember you have called the police racist and violent and overly militarized. Are those the people you want in control of all the guns in the country? There are great elements that we can use when we're trying to counteract some of these arguments from anti-gunners, and the senator just never used any of them. Jon Stewart never gave him the chance to speak, and then as a result, throughout the interview, the senator just didn't look like he knew what he was talking about, didn't look like we as gun owners had a decent plan to keep ourselves safe and to protect our own rights and to stop crime. And I think that's what the senator was hoping to be able to do, but he just never really got off the ground during that interview with Jon Stewart. I'd like to compare Jon Stewart's interview style with somebody like Joe Rogan, who actually listens to people with alternate viewpoints and tries to explore the ideas much more deeply. He listens, he hears people out, he wants to talk about what's going on, and Jon Stewart just doesn't do that. At one point in this interview, Jon Stewart says, stop, wait a minute, I want you to know, I want to make it clear, I'm in support of the Second Amendment. No, I don't think he is, and I think that was a perfect time for Senator Dom to sit up and say, well, wait a minute there, Jon Stewart. How much do you support the Second Amendment? What level of infringement do you want? How do you want to control guns in this country? Just turn that question around on him, that statement where Jon Stewart says, well, I'm in support of the Second Amendment, but Now remember, when we say that, when we're talking to people and I say, well, I support this, but, once you say but, or although, or however, that negates everything you just said, because now you are coming at it from a different point of view and a different standing. I'm in support of the Second Amendment, but I just want the police to have the guns. It's okay for the police and the militia, the National Guard, to have the guns. Maybe that's what Jon Stewart is saying. Think about what he wants to do. He says there's 400 million guns in the country, and he doesn't want people to have guns. How is he going to get those guns? That sounds to me like house-to-house searches, like a complete obliteration of the other amendments that we have, specifically the Fourth Amendment against search and seizure. So how is Jon Stewart thinking he is going to reduce the number of guns in the country? He should go and take them. I suggest he should go and take them from the most violent neighborhoods in the country first. And all the rest of us, law-abiding gun owners, get to keep our guns, and then we see what happens to the crime rate when the police go to those bad neighborhoods, the place where crime actually happens, and they go and they take away guns from real criminals there. Honest law-abiding citizens use guns more than 1 million times a year to protect themselves. Nobody's talking about that. We have the right to protect ourselves. We have the responsibility to do so legally. Criminals don't uphold their responsibility to use guns properly. They are using guns to hurt people, take things away from people, and kill people. That's not what we, as responsible gun owners, want. We want people to use guns responsibly to protect themselves. And in order to do that, the first thing we need is guns. We need to have the right to keep and bear arms protected and not infringed. And Jon Stewart just wants to take that right away. In the end, I feel really bad for Senator Dom because this segment is going viral. It's going all over the country. And he agreed to sit down with Stewart in a situation where all of the elements were stacked up against him. Jon Stewart was controlling that room and he knew it. He didn't want to explore the issues around guns and crime and how guns can be used to stop crime. He just wanted to control this discussion and make the senator look unprepared and unintelligent. And I think he kind of succeeded at that. You do that by cutting people off, by never letting them make their point and never letting them talk. And if you watch the entire interview, that's exactly what happened. That's just what this interview was. It wasn't an exploration of firearms policy. It was a hit piece designed to make this senator look bad. And the one thing I can tell you, folks, don't get your gun news from comedians. You got to make sure that you're looking into this yourself. Become politically active. Don't listen to people like Jon Stewart. He has one thing on his mind. He wants to push the idea of gun control, and we don't need it. We have the right to keep and bear arms, and with that comes our responsibility to do it properly. That's what I implore you to do. It's a true story of self-defense. We interviewed an armed Lyft driver who was carjacked to help answer these questions. Should I carry a gun while driving? And what does a carjacking actually look like? Just click the video next to me to watch this must-see interview.